The cockpit alarms screamed just as Flight 782 disappeared into the storm. Captain Ava Monroe tightened her grip on the control yoke while lightning flashed across the windshield, illuminating towering clouds that looked like mountains in the night sky. Rain hammered the aircraft with terrifying force. The plane lurched violently. A baby cried somewhere behind the cockpit door. Passengers screamed. The first officer looked pale. "We've lost the left hydraulic system." Ava's pulse raced, but her voice remained calm. "Maintain heading. Run the emergency checklist." Outside, the private jet dropped another 500 feet before stabilizing. Inside the cabin, crystal glasses shattered. Expensive luggage crashed from overhead compartments. Someone prayed aloud. Ava had flown through hurricanes, blizzards, and engine failures during her 12-year career. But this was different. The aircraft wasn't simply fighting the weather. Someone had tampered with it. At 32, Ava Monroe had become one of the youngest captains ever hired by Falcon Elite Aviation. She loved flying more than anything. Not because it paid well. Not because it sounded impressive. Because the sky had always been the one place where no one judged her. On the ground, people noticed her curves before her achievements. Passengers occasionally mistook her for a flight attendant. Executives questioned whether she was experienced enough. Strangers offered diet advice she had never requested. But 38,000 feet above the earth, only skill mattered. An airplane didn't care what size uniform its captain wore. It only cared whether she could bring everyone home. And Ava always did. "Captain!" The first officer's voice snapped her back to reality. "We're losing fuel pressure." Ava scanned the instruments. Something didn't make sense. Hydraulics, fuel pressure, navigation glitches. 3 unrelated failures. 2 perfect. 2 coordinated. She narrowed her eyes. This isn't mechanical. What? Someone wanted this aircraft to go down. The cockpit fell silent. 30 minutes earlier, a black SUV had pulled onto the private runway. The passenger list had changed at the last minute. 1 VIP. No public identity. Maximum security. Falcon Elite's operations manager had personally greeted Ava. "Your passenger requested complete privacy." "Business executive?" "So I'm told." "He'll board through the rear stairs." No photographs. No questions. Ava had simply nodded. Private charter clients often valued discretion. She hadn't looked twice. Now, she wished she had. The turbulence intensified. The warning chime echoed again. A flight attendant called the cockpit. "Captain, 1 passenger is injured." "How badly?" "Head wound." "Keep pressure on it." "We're trying." Another violent jolt threw the aircraft sideways. The attendant cried out before the line went dead. Ava made her decision. "We're diverting. The nearest airport is 25 minutes away." "We don't have 25. She spotted a military airfield on the emergency navigation chart. "Closed to civilian traffic." "But long enough." "We're landing there. They'll never approve it. We'll apologize after everyone survives." The rain finally broke just enough for the runway lights to appear through the darkness. Barely. Ava guided the jet lower. Crosswinds slammed against the wings. The landing gear locked. Speed. 148. Flaps. Set. The runway rushed toward them. Closer. Closer. The wheels struck hard. The aircraft bounced once before Ava gently corrected. Reverse thrust roared. Smoke rose from the tires. The private jet finally rolled to a stop. For several seconds, no one moved. Then applause erupted throughout the cabin. People laughed. Some cried. One elderly passenger kissed the floor after stepping off the aircraft. Ava simply leaned back in her seat. Another flight. Another safe landing. Or so she thought. Minutes later, she entered the passenger cabin. A man lay unconscious across the cream leather seats. Blood stained the collar of his charcoal suit. A deep cut stretched across his forehead where loose luggage had struck him during the violent landing. The flight attendant looked relieved. "Captain, he's getting worse." Ava immediately knelt beside him. Despite the expensive tailored suit and luxury watch, he looked strangely peaceful. Strong jaw, dark hair, a faint scar above one eyebrow. He couldn't have been older than 35. She checked his pulse. Weak. Uneven. "Get the emergency medical kit." The flight attendant hesitated. "We're supposed to wait for his security team. He needs treatment now." She cleaned the wound, stabilized his neck, and checked his pupils with practiced precision. Years before becoming a pilot, Ava had served as an Air Force flight medic. The training had never left her. "He has a concussion." She looked toward the attendant. "Call an ambulance." The attendant swallowed nervously. I don't think that's possible." "Why not?" Before she could answer, the cabin door opened. 6 men in tailored black suits entered simultaneously. They moved with military discipline. Sharp eyes. Invisible earpieces. Perfect formation. Every instinct told Ava they weren't corporate bodyguards. One silver-haired man stepped forward. "How is he?" "He needs a hospital." "No." His answer came instantly. "He goes with us." Ava stood. "He has a head injury. He needs a CT scan. He'll receive treatment elsewhere." She folded her arms. "I'm responsible for every passenger until they're medically transferred." The older man studied her. Few people spoke to him that way, especially not civilians. "You're refusing me?" "I'm refusing to risk my patient's life." For a long moment, neither looked away. Finally, the silver-haired man gave the smallest nod. "Interesting." Before anyone could speak again, the unconscious passenger slowly opened his eyes. Dark. Intense. Remarkably calm despite the blood running down his temple. His gaze settled on Ava first. "You landed the aircraft?" "Yes." "You ignored orders to save us." "I ignored bad decisions." For the first time, the corners of his mouth lifted ever so slightly. Then he lost consciousness again. One of the suited men quietly exhaled in relief. "Thank God." Ava frowned. "Who is he?" Silence. The silver-haired advisor finally removed a black leather wallet from the man's jacket. Inside was no driver's license. No credit cards. Only a single black metal card engraved with one name. Luca DeLuca. The flight attendant gasped. One security officer lowered his head respectfully. Ava looked around, confused. "What?" The older man answered quietly. "Captain, you just saved the life of the most feared Mafia King in Europe." Before Ava could process those words, every light on the runway suddenly went out. Darkness swallowed the airfield. Gunfire exploded from somewhere beyond the hangars. Bullets slammed into the side of the private jet. One bodyguard shouted, "Ambush!" The silver-haired advisor drew a concealed pistol. Then he looked directly at Ava. "If our king dies tonight, they'll kill every witness." The first bullets shattered the cabin windows, and Ava realized the emergency landing had only been the beginning. The first bullet shattered the cabin window beside Ava's head. Glass exploded across the aisle. She instinctively dropped to the floor as another burst of gunfire ripped through the fuselage. Passengers screamed. A flight attendant pulled two elderly travelers behind a row of leather seats, while the silver-haired advisor barked orders into a hidden radio. "Protect the boss. Secure the aircraft. Snipers on the hangars." Outside, headlights cut through the darkness. Three black armored SUVs raced toward the private jet from the opposite side of the runway, while flashes of automatic gunfire lit up the rain-soaked tarmac. Ava's pulse hammered in her ears. She had survived storms. She had survived engine failures. She had never survived a battlefield. The unconscious man beside her groaned softly. Luca DeLuca, the Mafia King. His pulse was weaker than before. Blood continued soaking through the bandage she had wrapped around his head. She looked toward the silver-haired advisor. "He needs a hospital now." The older man fired two controlled shots through the broken cabin door before answering. "If we leave this aircraft, they'll kill him. If he stays here, he may die anyway." Their eyes met. Neither liked the choices before them. Another explosion rocked the runway. One of the engines burst into flames, sending thick black smoke curling into the night sky. The advisor made his decision. "Move him." Ava immediately knelt beside Luca. "We need something rigid." The flight attendant hurried over with an emergency evacuation board normally used for spinal injuries. Together they carefully secured Luca onto it. As they lifted him, his eyes fluttered open again. Everything around him was blurred. Smoke, gunfire, flashing lights. Then he saw her, the woman with determined blue eyes who refused to abandon him. "You," he whispered weakly. "Easy," Ava replied. "Save your strength. You should have left." She almost laughed despite the chaos. "I'm a pilot. I don't leave passengers behind." For the briefest moment, something unreadable crossed his face. Respect. Then his eyes closed again. The rear aircraft door burst open. Rain poured inside. Two of Luca's bodyguards formed a shield around Ava as they carried him down the stairs toward the waiting SUVs. Bullets sparked against the metal steps. One guard cried out, clutching his shoulder before another immediately took his place. No one slowed down. Ava had never seen discipline like it. No shouting. No panic. Every movement was practiced. Almost military. Halfway across the runway, another burst of gunfire forced everyone to the ground. A sniper. The silver-haired advisor scanned the control tower. There! A muzzle flash appeared for less than a second. One Romano marksman answered immediately. The distant figure disappeared. "Go!" the advisor ordered. They reached the lead SUV just as another explosion consumed part of the private jet. The blast wave threw Ava forward. Strong hands caught her before she struck the pavement. Luca, still half-conscious. He had somehow reached for her despite barely being able to stay awake. His grip loosened almost instantly. Ava stared at him in disbelief. He should barely be moving. The advisor noticed. Our boss protects first, even when he cannot protect himself. The convoy sped through deserted mountain roads. Rain pounded against the armored windows. Inside the vehicle, Ava focused entirely on Luca. His breathing had become shallow. She checked his pupils again. Something was wrong. Very wrong. She looked toward the advisor. Did he hit his head only during the landing? No. He was injured before boarding. Her eyes narrowed. What kind of injury? The advisor hesitated. A bomb exploded near his convoy this afternoon. Ava immediately understood. The luggage didn't cause all this. No. She gently examined the back of Luca's neck. Then she found it. A tiny puncture wound hidden beneath his collar. Her expression changed. This isn't from the explosion. The advisor leaned closer. What is it? She pointed carefully. Needle mark. Silence filled the SUV. He was injected. The advisor's face hardened. Poison. I don't know yet. But whatever it is. His condition isn't being caused only by the concussion. He immediately spoke into his radio. Search every vehicle from today's convoy. No one touches anything. We've been compromised. Ava looked at him. You have a traitor. His silence confirmed it. 40 minutes later, the convoy passed through enormous iron gates guarded by heavily armed security teams. Beyond them stood an estate unlike anything Ava had ever imagined. A sprawling Italian-style villa surrounded by vineyards, fountains, and centuries-old olive trees. The mansion glowed beneath hundreds of warm lights. Luxury filled every corner. Yet no one admired it. Everyone was focused on one thing: saving Luca. Doctors rushed through the entrance carrying emergency equipment. The household staff stood anxiously in the grand foyer. As Ava stepped inside, she finally realized how influential the unconscious man truly was. Every person lowered their head respectfully as his stretcher passed. No one questioned orders. No one spoke above a whisper. They weren't merely loyal. They loved him. Inside the private medical suite, 3 physicians immediately surrounded Luca. The eldest doctor glanced toward Ava. Family only. She didn't move. He has unequal pupils. Possible toxin exposure. You'll miss it if you only treat the head injury. The physician frowned. I've been practicing medicine for 30 years, and I've spent 12 years keeping critically injured passengers alive at 30,000 feet. Silence settled over the room. The silver-haired advisor spoke calmly. Listen to her. The physician reluctantly examined the puncture wound. Moments later his expression shifted. She's right. He quickly ordered blood tests. Within minutes, the laboratory confirmed everyone's worst fear. A rare neurotoxin. Slow-acting. Nearly impossible to detect. The concussion had hidden the symptoms. Without Ava's observation, the antidote would have come too late. The physician looked at her with open admiration. You didn't just save him in the air. You saved him again. Just before sunrise, Luca finally regained consciousness. The room was quiet. Soft morning light filtered through tall windows. He turned his head slowly until he found Ava sitting in a nearby chair, exhausted but still awake. You stayed. She looked up from her untouched cup of coffee. You were my passenger. You're not anymore. She smiled faintly. Old habits. For a long moment he simply watched her. Most people stayed close to him because they feared him, or wanted something from him. This woman looked at him exactly as she had looked at every frightened passenger on her aircraft, as another human being. "What do you do when you're not saving stubborn strangers?" he asked. "I'm usually flying them." A shadow of a smile crossed his face. Then he asked the question no one else expected. "Captain Ava Monroe." He held her gaze steadily. "Will you stay?" The room fell silent. The search teams deployed immediately. Helicopters lifted from the estate's private airfield. Armored vehicles spread across the city. Drones scanned abandoned factories. Every available resource moved with extraordinary precision. Ava stood beside the operations table, watching everything unfold. "I've never seen anything like this." Luca looked toward the moving digital markers. "My people know one rule." "What rule?" "We never leave family behind." The words struck her unexpectedly. Family. He wasn't only talking about blood relatives. He meant everyone under his protection. She understood why his people followed him so willingly. Hours passed. No sign of Ethan. The command center grew quieter. Coffee cups replaced adrenaline. Even the analysts looked exhausted. Ava rubbed her eyes. "You should rest," Luca said. "I can't. You've been awake nearly 30 hours. So have you. I'll survive." She looked directly at him. "You don't look after yourself very well." He raised an eyebrow. "I've been told that. I'm telling you again." For the first time, Vittorio quietly smiled before returning to his tablet. Later that afternoon, Sophia found Ava standing alone in one of the estate gardens. Ancient olive trees stretched across rolling hills while fountains whispered softly beneath the afternoon sun. The elderly housekeeper carried 2 cups of tea. "You needed a break." Ava accepted the warm cup. "Thank you." Sophia studied her for a moment. "You're wondering why everyone is so devoted to him." Ava didn't deny it. "He doesn't seem." She searched for the right words. "Like the stories." Sophia smiled gently. "The stories never mention that he built schools after the earthquake, or paid for children's heart surgeries, or quietly bought homes for the families of guards who died protecting innocent people." Ava looked toward the distant vineyards. "Why keep it secret?" "Because he doesn't do it for applause." She sipped her tea thoughtfully. "Then why does the world only know the monster?" Sophia's smile faded. "Because monsters make better headlines than kind men." That evening, Luca entered the mansion library carrying a leather folder. Ava looked up from the aviation charts spread across the table. "I thought you'd be working." "I am." He placed the folder in front of her. She opened it carefully. Inside were copies of her professional records, flight certifications, military commendations, letters from passengers whose lives she had saved. Her eyes widened. "Why do you have these?" "I wanted to know the woman who landed my aircraft." She laughed softly. "You investigated me." "I did." "And—" He met her gaze. "I discovered something interesting." "What?" "You've never lost a passenger." She looked away modestly. "I've been lucky." "No." His voice remained calm. "You've been exceptional." Warmth spread across her cheeks. Compliments had never come easily to her, especially from someone who rarely wasted words. Before she could respond, one of the intelligence officers hurried into the library. "Boss." Luca stood immediately. "What happened?" "We intercepted a phone call." "And—" The officer looked toward Ava. "It lasted only 11 seconds. But we identified the voice." He pressed play. A recording filled the room. Weak. Frightened. "Eva!" Ava froze. Ethan, don't let them. The message ended with a sharp metallic sound. Then silence. The communications analyst swallowed hard. We traced the signal. Luca's eyes narrowed. Location. The analyst pointed to a blinking marker on the map. An abandoned aircraft maintenance hangar. Less than 15 miles away. Ava's heart began racing. He needs us. Luca looked toward Vittorio. Assemble the team. Then he turned back to Ava. This time, you stay beside me. Neither of them noticed the tiny drone hovering high above the vineyards. Its camera zoomed in on the mansion, on Ava, on Luca standing beside her. Miles away, inside a dark warehouse, a masked man watched the live feed on a tablet. He smiled coldly. They're finally starting to trust each other. He switched off the screen. Perfect. It's time to make sure only one of them comes back alive. Night settled over the city as the convoy rolled silently through deserted industrial roads. No flashing lights. No sirens. Only 6 matte black armored SUVs moving through abandoned warehouses and rusting hangars that had once serviced military aircraft decades earlier. Rain from the previous night's storm still covered the cracked pavement, reflecting the convoy's headlights like broken glass. Inside the lead vehicle, Ava stared through the window without really seeing anything. Every passing building reminded her of Ethan. He had loved airplanes since he was 5 years old. While other children collected toys, he collected model aircraft. When Ava earned her pilot's license, Ethan had proudly told everyone his sister flew closer to the stars than anyone else. Now he was somewhere ahead. Scared. Alone. Because of her. She clenched her fists. This should have been me. Luca looked away from the digital map in his hands. No. They came for him because they couldn't reach you. They're the ones responsible. She shook her head. If I hadn't landed that plane, you would have buried everyone on board. His voice remained calm. You made the only decision that saved innocent lives. She didn't answer. Deep inside, guilt continued growing. Luca noticed. He understood that kind of guilt. It had lived inside him for years. The convoy stopped nearly a mile from the abandoned airfield. Vittorio projected satellite images onto a portable screen inside a mobile command vehicle. The main hangar. He pointed toward the largest structure. Heat signatures confirm at least 20 armed men. Another image appeared. 2 sniper positions occupied the control tower. A third team patrolled the fuel depot. This isn't a simple hostage exchange, Vittorio continued. They expected us. Luca folded his arms. They always did. Ava studied the map quietly. Something bothered her. She stepped closer. Can you zoom out? The technician expanded the satellite view. Her eyes narrowed immediately. Those aren't random patrol routes. Vittorio looked at her. What do you see? She pointed toward 3 abandoned taxiways surrounding the hangar. Aircraft escape lanes. The room fell silent. The attackers left these areas completely unguarded. Why would they? They didn't. She looked directly at Luca. They want us entering from the front. So they made the side routes look safe. One of the tactical commanders frowned. A funnel. She nodded. They're channeling us exactly where they want. Luca's eyes remained on the map. Can you find another approach? She studied the airfield for several seconds, then smiled faintly. There. Everyone followed her finger. A narrow maintenance tunnel ran beneath the oldest runway. Half collapsed. Forgotten. Almost invisible. It connects directly beneath the western hangar. Vittorio looked impressed. How did you see that? I trained here. Silence. She looked almost embarrassed. When I was a cadet, I landed emergency drills on this runway. I remember the old maintenance system. Luca glanced toward Vittorio. Change the plan. The tactical commander nodded immediately. No debate. No hesitation. 15 minutes later, Luca's team entered the underground maintenance tunnel. Flashlights cut through decades of dust. Water dripped steadily from cracked concrete ceilings. The air smelled of oil and rust. Ava walked beside Luca. Your shoulder. He noticed her looking at the bandage beneath his shirt. It hurts. You should have said something. I've had worse. She stopped walking. No. He turned toward her. She stepped closer and carefully adjusted the medical dressing hidden beneath his collar. You keep pretending injuries don't matter. They matter. They just don't come first. She sighed softly. One day someone needs to take care of you. His eyes remained fixed on hers. They already are. Neither of them moved for a long moment. The quiet tunnel suddenly felt much smaller. Then Vittorio cleared his throat. We're approaching the hangar. The moment passed. But neither forgot it. Above them, inside the abandoned hangar, Ethan Monroe sat tied to a steel support beam. His lip was split. One wrist bled where the restraints had cut into his skin. Across the room stood a tall man wearing a charcoal suit instead of tactical gear. Unlike the mercenaries surrounding him, he looked perfectly relaxed. Gabriel Moreau, international arms broker, cybersecurity genius, and the man secretly financing the attacks against Luca's empire. He glanced at his watch. They're early. One mercenary approached. Should we move the hostage? Gabriel smiled. No. The hostage isn't the prize. He looked toward the massive cargo aircraft parked inside the hangar. The pilot is. He stood beside the cargo aircraft holding a compact remote control. Unlike the one beneath the fuel truck, this one remained intact. You've ruined years of planning. He smiled coldly. So I'll settle for ruining yours. He pressed the button. Nothing happened. His smile disappeared. He pressed it again. Still nothing. Confusion spread across his face. Ava looked toward the crushed maintenance platform. Looking for this? She held up the destroyed antenna module that had been attached to the detonator. I noticed it before you did. Gabriel's expression darkened. You were never supposed to survive that flight. Silence filled the hangar. Luca slowly stepped forward. What did you say? Gabriel laughed bitterly. The hydraulic failures. The poisoned injection. The airport ambush. The kidnapping. They were all distractions. He looked directly at Ava. She was always the target. Every person in the hangar froze. Gabriel continued calmly. 3 years ago, she unknowingly designed the only aviation security algorithm capable of exposing my global smuggling network. He smiled. She simply forgot. Ava's breathing became uneven. My memory. You lost it after our people sabotaged your training aircraft. The truth hit her like another explosion. The accident that had nearly ended her flying career had never been an accident. Gabriel slowly backed toward a side exit. You'll remember the rest soon enough. He disappeared through an emergency door just as police sirens echoed in the distance. Luca looked toward Vittorio. After him. Tactical teams immediately pursued the escaping mastermind. Inside the hangar, however, another problem emerged. A frightened engineer pointed toward the cargo aircraft's cockpit. "Boss! The engines!" Everyone turned. Both turbine engines had suddenly started on their own. The aircraft began rolling slowly toward the runway. A technician stared in horror. "No one's inside." Ava's eyes widened. He activated the autopilot. She looked beyond the moving aircraft. At the fuel storage facility directly ahead. If the unmanned cargo plane reached the tanks, the explosion would destroy half the airport. Without another word, Ava started running toward the moving aircraft. Luca grabbed her wrist. "You can't." She looked at him with unwavering determination. "I'm the only pilot here." She broke free and sprinted toward the accelerating plane. Luca watched her disappear into the darkness. For the first time in years, fear outweighed strategy, because the woman he loved was running straight toward an aircraft that had become a missile. The cargo aircraft gathered speed across the rain-soaked runway. Its engines roared louder with every passing second, shaking the hangar doors and sending loose debris skidding across the concrete. Ava ran without slowing. Cold air burned her lungs as she sprinted toward the moving aircraft, calculating distance, speed, and momentum with every step. Behind her, Luca shouted her name. "Ava!" She didn't stop. She couldn't. If the aircraft reached the fuel storage facility, the explosion would destroy the airport, kill hundreds of people, and erase every piece of evidence they had fought to protect. She reached the boarding ladder just as the aircraft rolled past. With one desperate leap, she caught the metal handrail. The impact sent pain shooting through her shoulder, but she refused to let go. Using every ounce of strength she had, she climbed onto the aircraft while it continued accelerating down the runway. Inside the cockpit, warning lights flashed across every instrument panel. The captain's seat was empty. Just as she'd feared, the airplane was flying itself. Or rather, someone on the outside was controlling it. She slid into the left seat and immediately disconnected the automatic throttle. Nothing happened. The controls remained locked. Her eyes raced across the overhead panel. This isn't standard autopilot. She quickly recognized the modified flight computer. Someone had installed a remote flight control module between the primary systems and the aircraft's flight management computer. It wasn't aviation equipment. It was military technology. Outside, Luca watched from the runway. He climbed into an armored SUV. "Follow that aircraft." The driver hesitated. "Boss, it's already too fast." "Then don't lose it." The SUV accelerated after the plane as Vittorio coordinated helicopters overhead. "Air Unit 1, report." A pilot answered immediately. "The aircraft will reach the fuel depot in less than 3 minutes." Luca's jaw tightened. "Keep visual contact." His eyes never left the moving aircraft. Inside the cockpit, Ava ignored the flashing alarms. Panic had no place here. She forced herself to think. Every aircraft had one rule. If one system failed, another existed. Then she remembered something from her military training. An emergency maintenance circuit, designed only for ground engineers, never intended to be used while the aircraft was moving. She smiled faintly. Let's hope they never imagined a pilot would know this. She opened the floor access panel beneath her seat. Hidden below was a bundle of maintenance cables. She reached inside and manually disconnected the remote flight module. For one terrifying second, every display went black. The engines remained at full power. Then, the primary flight controls came back online. "Come on!" She pulled the throttles backward. The engines finally responded. Reverse thrust wasn't possible on the ground at that speed, but engine power dropped sharply. The aircraft began slowing. Outside, the helicopters changed course. "It's decelerating." Vittorio smiled for the first time all night. She did it. The aircraft rolled to a stop less than 200 yards from the fuel tanks. Silence spread across the runway. Then cheers erupted from police officers, firefighters, and Romano security teams alike. Ava shut down the engines before leaning back in her seat. Only then did she realize her hands were trembling. The cockpit door opened. Luca climbed inside. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He simply looked at her, at the woman who had once again risked everything to save complete strangers. "You frightened me," he said quietly. She managed a tired smile. "I seem to be making a habit of that." "You do. You should stop." She laughed softly. "I'll consider it." He stepped closer. "You never think about yourself." "I do." "When?" "When everyone else is safe." He closed his eyes briefly. "I've commanded men in battles. I've negotiated with presidents. I've survived things that should have killed me." He looked directly into her eyes. "But watching you run toward that aircraft," his voice caught for the first time, "was the most helpless I've ever felt." Ava had never seen him like this. The feared Mafia King, calm in every crisis, now standing in front of her with genuine fear still visible in his eyes. She reached up and gently touched the small cut along his cheek. "You came after me. I always will." The words settled between them. Simple, honest, certain. Neither of them noticed the growing crowd outside the aircraft. Firefighters, pilots, police officers, Romano guards. They all watched quietly as Luca removed his suit jacket and carefully draped it over Ava's shoulders. "You'll catch a cold." She smiled. "That's your biggest concern?" "No. My biggest concern is you." He paused. "The cold is second." She laughed again. The sound eased something inside him. For the first time in years, Luca realized he wasn't simply protecting someone because it was his responsibility. He was protecting the woman who had become the safest place in his own heart. Later that evening, after statements had been given and the airport secured, they returned to the estate. Sophia was waiting in the kitchen despite the late hour. "I knew neither of you had eaten." Fresh bread rested on the table beside homemade tomato soup and roasted vegetables. Ava blinked. "After everything that's happened, you cooked." Sophia smiled warmly. "My husband always said important decisions should never be made on an empty stomach." Luca looked at the bread. "It smells like home." Sophia quietly left them alone. For several minutes they ate in comfortable silence. No strategy meetings. No security briefings. Just warm food and the sound of rain against the windows. Finally Ava looked up. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "When you first learned who I was, why did you trust me?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he broke a piece of bread and set it on her plate. "Because the first time I opened my eyes after that landing, everyone in the cabin looked at me with fear." He met her gaze. "You looked at me like a patient, Not a Mafia King. Just someone who needed help. She smiled gently. My father used to tell me something. What? The sky doesn't care who you are. It only asks whether you're willing to do your job. Luca nodded slowly. I think your father was a wise man. He was. A comfortable silence returned. Then Vittorio entered without knocking. His expression was more serious than either of them had seen before. We recovered Gabriel Moreau's encrypted servers. Luca set down his coffee. And Vittorio placed a weathered leather notebook on the table. We finally know why he wanted Captain Monroe. Ava frowned. What is that? Vittorio opened the first page. Every line was written in Gabriel's handwriting. Across the top, one sentence had been underlined twice. Operation Black Falcon. Subject AM must never recover her final memory. Ava felt her heartbeat quicken. There was more. Vittorio slowly turned to the final page. Taped inside was an old photograph. A younger Ava stood beside her father on an airbase runway. But someone else stood behind them. A man smiling at the camera. Gabriel Moreau. Ava stared at the picture, her face draining of color. No, she whispered. He knew my father. The photograph refused to leave Ava's mind. She sat in the mansion library long after everyone else had gone to bed, staring at the faded image beneath the warm glow of a reading lamp. Her father stood proudly in his Air Force uniform with one hand resting on her shoulder. She couldn't have been older than 12, grinning beside the small training aircraft she had dreamed of flying one day. And behind them, Gabriel Moreau, smiling as though he belonged there. I don't understand, Ava whispered. My father would have never worked with a criminal. Luca sat across from her, watching quietly. Maybe he didn't know who Gabriel really was. She shook her head. My father noticed everything. He taught me how to read weather before I could solve algebra. He would have seen through a liar. Vittorio entered carrying another folder. We've checked military records. And Gabriel wasn't using his real name. He placed an old personnel file on the table. 20 years ago. He served as a civilian aviation systems consultant. Ava slowly opened the file. The younger Gabriel wore glasses instead of designer suits. His hair was shorter. His expression almost friendly. One sentence immediately caught her attention. Assigned to Project Black Falcon. She looked toward Vittorio. What was Black Falcon? He remained silent for a moment. We're still trying to determine that. 2 days later, the city hosted the annual International Aviation Safety Summit, one of the largest gatherings of airline executives, government officials, military aviation leaders, and aircraft manufacturers in Europe. Normally, Ava would have attended as a commercial captain representing Falcon Elite Aviation. This year, everything felt different. The attempted hijacking had become international news. So had the emergency landing. Television stations called her a hero. She disliked the word. Heroes chased recognition. She had simply done her job. As their convoy arrived outside the historic Palazzo Convention Center, hundreds of reporters waited behind security barriers. Camera flashes lit up the entrance. News helicopters circled overhead. Ava looked down at the elegant emerald green gown Sophia had chosen for her. It still feels strange. Luca smiled. What does? Everyone looking at me. He gently offered his arm. They're looking because you gave hundreds of people another tomorrow. She slipped her hand through his arm. They should be thanking the engineers who built safer airplanes. They will. But today, they're thanking the woman who knew how to use them. Inside the ballroom, conversations paused as they entered. Government ministers greeted Luca respectfully. Airline CEOs congratulated Ava on her extraordinary landing. Several veteran pilots approached simply to shake her hand. One elderly captain with silver wings pinned to his jacket smiled warmly. "I've flown for 48 years. Ava smiled back. "That's incredible. I've only seen 2 emergency landings better than yours." She blinked. "I was just trying to survive." He chuckled. "That's exactly why it was so good." Professional pilots understood. Ego had no place in an emergency. Only discipline. Only training. Only calm. A familiar voice interrupted. "Captain Monroe." Ava turned. Standing several feet away was Richard Hale, Falcon Elite Aviation's chief executive officer. The same executive who had repeatedly overlooked her for international command positions despite her flawless safety record. He smiled awkwardly. "I owe you an apology." She waited quietly. "I judged appearances instead of ability." His shoulders lowered. "I was wrong." Several reporters nearby immediately began recording. Richard continued. "Effective immediately. Falcon Elite is establishing the Ava Monroe Aviation Leadership Scholarship." Gasps spread through the surrounding crowd. "It'll support young women pursuing commercial aviation careers." He extended his hand. "I hope you'll help us lead it." Ava looked at the offered handshake. Years earlier, she would have dreamed about hearing those words. Today, recognition mattered far less than integrity. She accepted his hand. "I'll help. But only if every scholarship is awarded on skill, never appearance." Richard nodded immediately. "You have my word." Nearby journalists applauded. Not because of the scholarship. Because the woman once underestimated had responded with grace instead of bitterness. Luca watched the exchange silently. Pride filled his eyes. Not because people admired Ava. Because she remained exactly the same woman he had met on the aircraft. Kind. Confident. Never arrogant. Later that evening, the summit moderator made an unexpected announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have one final speaker." The giant screens illuminated Ava's name. She looked toward Luca. "You knew about this. I suspected. You arranged it. I encouraged it." She laughed softly. "I should have guessed." Walking toward the stage, Ava felt nearly 1,000 pairs of eyes following her. She wasn't thinking about cameras. She wasn't thinking about headlines. She was thinking about every young girl who had ever been told she looked wrong for a cockpit. She stood behind the podium. The ballroom fell silent. "When I was 11 years old, someone asked why I wanted to become a pilot." She smiled. "I said because clouds never judge people." Soft laughter spread through the audience. She continued. "I've spent my career proving that competence has no size. Leadership has no dress size. Courage has no perfect appearance. The sky asks only one question. When lives depend on you, will you be ready?" The applause began before she had finished speaking. Soon the entire ballroom stood. Pilots, engineers, military officers, executives. Every person rose to their feet. Many wiped away tears. Not because she spoke dramatically, because she spoke honestly. As the applause continued, Luca walked onto the stage. No script. No prepared remarks. He took the microphone only after the audience grew quiet. People often ask how someone earns my trust. He looked toward Ava. They assume it's loyalty, or power, or fear. He shook his head. They're wrong. He reached for Ava's hand. I trust people who run toward danger when everyone else runs away. He turned back to the audience. This woman saved my life before she knew my name. She saved strangers without asking what they could give her. She reminded me that greatness begins with character. Then, before every camera in the room, he kissed the back of her hand. Not possessively, respectfully. The ballroom erupted once again. Across Europe, the image would appear on tomorrow's front pages. Not because the Mafia King had attended the summit, but because the world's most feared man had publicly honored the woman who changed him. Hidden among the catering staff, however, another pair of eyes watched silently. A waiter carrying a silver tray slipped a sealed envelope beneath Ava's chair before disappearing through the service entrance. Minutes later, as guests began leaving, Ava noticed the envelope lying on the floor. There was no name, only one handwritten sentence. Your father didn't die in an accident. Her heartbeat stopped. Inside the envelope was a small brass key. Attached to it was another note. Locker 417. Falcon Air Force Museum. Come alone if you want the truth. Ava slowly looked toward Luca, then back at the key. Somewhere, after 20 years, her father's greatest secret was waiting to be unlocked. The brass key rested in Ava's palm during the entire drive back to the estate. She turned it over again and again, studying every scratch along its worn surface. It looked ordinary, the kind of key that could open an old storage locker or a forgotten filing cabinet. Yet someone had risked slipping it to her inside one of the most heavily guarded events in Europe. Luca sat beside her in silence. Finally, he spoke. "You're thinking about going." She didn't deny it. "If the note is real, it might explain what happened to my father. If it's a trap..." She looked out the window. "Then it was designed for me." Luca nodded once. "Then we walk into it together." She smiled faintly. "The note specifically says alone. So did the airport ambush. And look how that turned out. Despite everything," she laughed. "You really don't like following instructions. Only bad ones." By sunrise the following morning, the Falcon Air Force Museum remained closed to the public. The old military base had been converted into a historical archive years earlier. Vintage fighter jets stood motionless beneath enormous hangars while retired aircraft lined the outdoor display grounds. Rain clouds drifted across the grey morning sky. Ava looked at the faded control tower. "I grew up here." Luca glanced toward her. "Your father brought you?" "Every birthday. He'd let me sit inside retired aircraft and pretend I was flying." Her voice softened. "He always said airplanes remember every hand that builds them." Luca quietly smiled. "He sounds like a remarkable man." He was. Vittorio had already secured the perimeter. Snipers occupied nearby rooftops. Drone surveillance monitored the surrounding roads. Despite the anonymous note requesting Ava come alone, Luca had no intention of trusting an invisible enemy. The museum curator nervously unlocked the archive building. "We haven't opened Locker Hall in years." Dust floated through the narrow corridor as they descended into the basement. Rows of steel storage lockers stretched beneath fluorescent lights. Each door carried a faded brass number. Ava stopped walking. There. Locker 417. Her hands trembled slightly as she inserted the brass key. The old lock clicked open. Inside rested only 3 items: a leather-bound journal, a military flight recorder, and a sealed envelope with her father's handwriting across the front. For Ava. She slowly opened it. The paper inside had yellowed with age. Her father's words were unmistakable. "If you're reading this, then someone finally found what I tried to hide." Tears filled her eyes. She continued reading silently. Project Black Falcon was never about aircraft. It was about creating an invisible aviation network capable of moving anything, anywhere, without detection. I refused to help. If anything happens to me, trust no one connected to the project. Ava stopped reading. Her breathing became uneven. My father knew. Vittorio carefully examined the journal. It gets worse. He opened several pages filled with names, diagrams, and handwritten notes. Every page documented illegal weapons shipments disguised as humanitarian cargo flights. One name appeared repeatedly: Gabriel Moreau. Another appeared only once. Vittorio's face lost all color. "No." Luca looked toward him. "What?" Without answering, Vittorio turned the journal around. Another familiar name had been circled in red. Alessandro Ricci, the silver-haired advisor, Luca's oldest friend, the man who had rescued him at the airport, the man who had stood beside him for nearly 20 years. Silence crushed the room. Ava stared at the page. That can't be right. Luca remained perfectly still. He was with my father. He buried my parents. He built this empire beside me. Vittorio slowly closed the journal. "We don't know what this means yet." Before anyone could say another word, a gunshot shattered the silence. The museum's basement lights exploded. Darkness swallowed the corridor. Automatic weapons erupted from both ends of the hallway. "Cover!" Luca immediately pulled Ava behind a concrete support column as bullets sparked against steel lockers. Museum glass shattered upstairs. Explosions echoed through the old hangars. They had been followed. Romano security teams returned fire while civilians were evacuated through emergency exits. The narrow basement became a maze of ricocheting bullets and drifting smoke. Vittorio coordinated defensive positions with calm precision. "Team Alpha, seal the east stairwell. Bravo team, protect Mrs. DeLuca." Ava remained behind cover beside Luca. She could hear footsteps rapidly approaching from deeper inside the archive. Then, a familiar voice echoed through the darkness. "Boss!" Alessandro Ricci emerged slowly from the smoke. His silver hair was damp from the rain. His tailored suit remained immaculate despite the gunfire. His hands were raised. "I can explain." Every weapon in the corridor turned toward him. Luca stared silently. "Can you?" Alessandro looked genuinely pained. "I never wanted you to discover it like this." Ava felt Luca tense beside her. "You knew my father?" she asked. Alessandro looked toward her. "Yes. He was the bravest pilot I ever met." "Then why is your name in his journal?" He closed his eyes briefly. "Because I infiltrated Black Falcon." Silence followed. "I wasn't working for Gabriel. I was working against him." Vittorio frowned. "That's convenient." Alessandro reached slowly inside his jacket. Instantly dozens of rifles aimed at his chest. He stopped moving. "I'm taking out my intelligence credentials. Nothing else." He removed a weathered identification wallet. Not Mafia. Not military. An international intelligence agency. Ava stared in disbelief. Luca never looked away from his oldest advisor. "You expect me to believe you've been hiding this for 20 years? I expected to tell you after Gabriel was dead. You lied to me. I protected you. You made that choice for me." Pain crossed Alessandro's face. "Yes." Before anyone could speak again, a single suppressed gunshot echoed through the basement. Alessandro jerked violently. A dark stain spread across his chest. He looked down in confusion before collapsing to one knee. "No!" Ava shouted. She rushed toward him. Another suppressed shot struck the concrete inches from her feet. A sniper, hidden somewhere above. Alessandro grabbed Ava's wrist with surprising strength. His breathing became ragged. "It wasn't." He coughed painfully. "Vittorio." Luca leaned closer. "What?" Alessandro forced out his final words. "The traitor is already." His voice stopped. His hand slipped from Ava's. He collapsed motionless onto the cold concrete floor. The sentence remained unfinished. Every person in the basement looked at one another. If Vittorio wasn't the traitor, then someone else inside Luca's trusted inner circle had orchestrated everything from the beginning, and that person was still standing among them. The silence after Alessandro's death felt heavier than the gunfire. For several long seconds, no one moved. Ava knelt beside him, pressing trembling fingers against his neck, even though she already knew the truth. There was no pulse. The man who had spent 2 decades protecting secrets had died before revealing the final one. She slowly closed his eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Luca remained perfectly still. His oldest friend had just died in front of him. But years of discipline kept every emotion hidden behind a calm expression. Only Ava noticed the slight tightening of his jaw. Only she saw the grief he refused to show anyone else. Vittorio crouched beside Alessandro's body. The bullet entered from above. He looked toward the shattered ceiling. The sniper fired through the ventilation shaft. Luca finally spoke. "Seal every exit. No one leaves." Romano security immediately spread throughout the museum while helicopters circled overhead. Within minutes the building was surrounded. Yet the sniper had already disappeared. Back at the estate, Alessandro's belongings were transferred to the intelligence division. His briefcase, his encrypted phone, his personal journals. Everything was examined. Hours passed without answers, until one young analyst suddenly stood. "Boss." The room fell silent. "I found something." He projected an old financial ledger onto the main screen. Thousands of transactions filled the display. Most appeared ordinary. Consulting fees, security contracts, transportation expenses. Then the analyst highlighted a pattern. Every 6 months, one payment disappeared into a charitable aviation foundation that no longer existed. Ava leaned forward. "That's my father's foundation." The analyst nodded. "It closed 20 years ago. So why is someone still sending money there?" He traced the transactions backward through layers of shell companies. Each transfer eventually connected to a single account. The account holder's name appeared. Victor Salazar. Vittorio frowned. I've never heard of him. Ava's face slowly lost color. I have. Everyone turned toward her. He trained pilots with my father. He attended our family barbecues. He carried my father's coffin. She swallowed hard. He cried at the funeral. Luca looked directly at the intelligence team. Find him. The lead analyst typed rapidly, then stopped. Boss. What? He's here. A satellite image appeared on the screen. An old mountain airfield less than 40 miles away. Heat signatures covered the hangars. Cargo aircraft. Armored vehicles. More than 60 armed personnel. Gabriel Moreau had gathered every remaining loyalist for one final stand. And standing beside him on the runway was Victor Salazar. The Romano convoy reached the mountain airfield just before sunset. Snow covered the surrounding peaks while bitter wind swept across the abandoned runway. Unlike the previous ambushes, Gabriel wasn't hiding anymore. He stood openly beside a massive cargo aircraft. Victor remained at his side. The old pilot looked almost saddened as Luca approached. It should have ended years ago. Luca's voice remained calm. You murdered innocent people. Victor shook his head. I sacrificed a few to save millions. Ava stepped forward. You killed my father. Pain crossed Victor's face. I begged him to join us. He refused. So you murdered him. I didn't pull the trigger. But you watched it happen. Victor lowered his eyes. I did. Ava felt tears gathering, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not until this ended. Gabriel smiled as he watched the confrontation. Emotional reunions are touching. He pressed a button on a handheld controller. The cargo aircraft behind him roared to life. Its rear loading ramp slowly opened. Rows of military drones filled the interior. Dozens, perhaps hundreds. Luca narrowed his eyes. What is this? Gabriel spread his arms proudly. The future. An autonomous air fleet. No pilots. No borders. No governments. Ava immediately understood. Project Black Falcon. He bowed dramatically. Exactly. My father refused to finish it. She looked at Victor. And you helped him. Victor answered quietly. I helped build the future. You built a weapon. Without warning, Gabriel activated the drones. One after another they lifted into the air. The sky filled with humming rotors. Security teams immediately opened fire. Several drones crashed into the snow. Dozens more continued advancing. Romano snipers worked with remarkable precision, but the sheer number threatened to overwhelm them. Ava watched the swarm carefully. Then something caught her attention. They're synchronized. Luca looked toward her. What? They aren't thinking independently. She pointed toward the cargo aircraft. They're all following one master signal. Gabriel smiled. Very good. She looked at Luca. If we disable the control transmitter, the entire swarm falls. Where is it? She didn't answer. She was already running. Straight toward the cargo aircraft. Gabriel saw her coming. So predictable. He signaled several mercenaries. They rushed to intercept her. Before they could reach her, Luca stepped into their path. His movements were calm, efficient, every strike deliberate. He disarmed the first attacker, redirected the second, and dropped the third without wasting a single motion. He wasn't fighting for victory anymore. He was fighting for time. Time for Ava. She reached the aircraft's loading ramp and climbed inside. Rows of servers lined the interior. At the center stood a reinforced communications console transmitting commands to every drone in the sky. She searched the wiring. There. A fiber-optic trunk connected the transmitter to the aircraft's power supply. She reached for it. Behind her, Gabriel's voice echoed through the cargo bay. "I wouldn't do that." She turned slowly. He stood only a few yards away, pistol aimed steadily at her. "You've ruined everything I've built." Ava looked at the transmitter, then back at him. "No. You ruined it the day you stopped valuing human life." His finger tightened on the trigger. Before he could fire, another shot echoed through the aircraft. Gabriel's pistol flew from his hand. Luca stood at the entrance, smoke rising from his weapon. Gabriel stumbled backward. Romano's security flooded into the aircraft. Within seconds, the remaining mercenaries surrendered. Outside, Ava pulled the main fiber-optic cable free. Every drone hovering above the battlefield immediately lost synchronization. One by one, they descended harmlessly into the snow. The sky became quiet. The war was over. Gabriel dropped to his knees as federal agents surrounded him. Victor Salazar looked at Ava with deep regret. "I wish I had chosen differently." She looked at him sadly. "So do I." He lowered his head without another word as officers placed him in handcuffs. Luca walked toward Ava. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he gently took both of her hands. "You saved my life on a runway." He smiled softly. "You saved my empire in the sky." She laughed through happy tears. "I was just doing my job." He shook his head. "No. You were saving people. And that's who you are." As the sun dipped behind the snow-covered mountains, rescue helicopters landed across the airfield. The final battle had ended. But one final question still remained. Luca reached into his coat pocket. He looked at Ava with a warmth she had never seen before. "Ava!" He slowly knelt in the snow. The soldiers, pilots, and security teams around them gradually fell silent. She looked at him in complete surprise. "What are you doing?" He smiled. "Changing both our flight plans." Snow drifted gently across the mountain airfield. The last rescue helicopter had lifted off, carrying the wounded to nearby hospitals. Federal agents escorted Gabriel Moreau and Victor Salazar toward armored transport vehicles, while emergency crews secured the abandoned cargo aircraft. Yet in the middle of the frozen runway, time seemed to stop. Luca remained on one knee. The feared Mafia King, who had spent years negotiating with presidents, dismantling criminal empires, and commanding the loyalty of thousands, looked at only one person. Ava Monroe. She stared at him, speechless. Around them, the wind carried nothing but silence. Luca slowly opened a small velvet box. Inside rested an elegant platinum ring. Not enormous. Not extravagant. Simple. Timeless. "My mother wore this ring for 34 years, he said quietly. "She believed love wasn't something you found. It was something you chose." Every person nearby respectfully looked away, giving them privacy despite standing only a few yards away. Luca smiled softly. "When I boarded your aircraft, I expected another business flight. Instead, I met the bravest woman I've ever known." His eyes never left hers. "You never cared about my money. You never cared about my reputation. You cared whether I was breathing." Ava felt tears gathering. He continued. You argued with my bodyguards. You challenged my decisions. You saved complete strangers before saving yourself. And somehow, he laughed quietly, you made the most feared man in Europe look forward to breakfast. She laughed through her tears. I suppose that's one achievement. He reached for her hand. Ava Monroe. My greatest rescue. My safest landing. My home. Will you marry me? This time because it's your choice? For several seconds she couldn't speak. She simply looked at him. The man she had expected to fear. The man the world called ruthless. The man who had never once asked her to become smaller, quieter, or less ambitious. Finally, she nodded. Yes. Her voice trembled. Yes. I choose you. The applause began quietly, then grew louder. Pilots, security officers, federal agents, firefighters. Even some of the officers escorting Gabriel smiled as Luca slipped the ring onto Ava's finger. He rose slowly before gently kissing her forehead. Not as a claim, as a promise. 6 months later, the DeLuca estate looked different. Security remained strong, but laughter echoed through the gardens far more often than silence. The vineyards had become Ava's favorite place to walk after long flights. She had returned to commercial aviation, exactly as she wanted. Luca never asked her to quit flying. In fact, he insisted she continue. The sky loved you before I met you, he often told her. I'm not taking that away. She smiled every time he said it. True to his word, Luca transformed part of the DeLuca Foundation into one of Europe's largest aviation safety charities. Old military hangars became advanced emergency response training centers. Scholarships were created for aspiring pilots from ordinary families. Maintenance engineers received grants to develop safer aircraft systems. Families who couldn't afford flight training suddenly found doors opening. Every building carried the same inscription near its entrance, dedicated to those who believe every safe landing begins with someone who refuses to give up. Ava protested when Luca named the foundation after her. You shouldn't. It isn't about me. He smiled. It never was. It's about everyone you'll inspire. Months later, Ava stood before a classroom filled with young aviation cadets. Some wore oversized training uniforms. Others nervously held notebooks across their laps. One teenage girl raised her hand. Captain Monroe? Yes. Were you ever scared? Ava smiled. Every pilot who tells you they've never been scared is lying. Soft laughter filled the room. The important question isn't whether you're afraid. It's whether fear makes your decisions. The students listened carefully. She continued. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing responsibility anyway. Outside the classroom window, Luca watched quietly. Vittorio stood beside him. You've been smiling a lot lately. Luca looked toward Ava. I finally have a reason. That evening, the estate hosted a celebration unlike any before. Pilots sat beside mechanics. Doctors laughed with security guards. Government officials shared tables with firefighters and rescue crews. No one cared about titles. Only friendships. Sophia wiped away happy tears as Ava and Luca shared their first dance beneath thousands of golden lights strung across the vineyard. Music floated gently through the warm evening air. Luca looked into Ava's eyes. You know. What? You still save me every day. She smiled. I don't think you need rescuing any more. I do. From what? He gently rested his forehead against hers. Myself. She understood. Without another word, she kissed him softly. The applause surrounding them faded into the background. For a moment, there was only the two of them. 1 year later, a new aircraft rolled out of Falcon Elite Aviation's manufacturing hangar. Its white fuselage gleamed beneath the morning sun. Across the nose, elegant silver lettering displayed its name. The Ava Grace. The company's first next-generation emergency response aircraft. Designed using safety systems inspired by Ava's recommendations. Before its inaugural flight, Richard Hale handed her a small plaque. You changed aviation. She shook her head. We all did. She turned toward the engineers standing proudly beside the aircraft. No airplane flies because of one person. It flies because hundreds of people care enough to build it safely. The engineers applauded. Luca watched from the crowd. His admiration never faded. Not because Ava had become famous, but because success had never changed her heart. Years later, newspapers still called Luca DeLuca the Mafia King. The title no longer mattered. People who truly knew him used a different description. The man who rebuilt an empire without sacrificing his humanity. Whenever journalists asked him what had transformed his life, he always gave the same answer. I boarded a plane expecting transportation. I found my future instead. As for Ava, she never stopped flying. She never stopped teaching. And she never stopped believing what her father had told her when she was only a little girl standing beside an old training aircraft. The sky doesn't care who you are. It only asks whether you'll bring people home. She spent the rest of her life doing exactly that. And every time she landed safely, one man was always waiting at the terminal. Not because he doubted her. Because he loved watching the woman who had once saved the wrong passenger. Come home to him. If this story touched your heart, tell us your favorite moment in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more cinematic Mafia romance stories filled with unforgettable heroes, courageous heroines, thrilling action, and slow-burn love. Your support helps bring the next adventure to life. Beneath the floor, Luca's tactical team reached the tunnel's final steel hatch. One technician quietly loosened the rusted bolts. The heavy cover lifted just enough to reveal the hangar interior. Vittorio counted silently. 23 mercenaries. 2 machine gun nests. 1 hostage. Then Ava whispered, "Wait." Everyone froze. She pointed toward the aircraft. "That fuel truck. What about it?" Luca asked. "It shouldn't be there." One commando frowned. "Why?" "The aircraft isn't being serviced." She looked more closely. "The hose isn't connected." Realization hit her instantly. "It's not a fuel truck. It's a bomb." Vittorio slowly lowered his binoculars. "They've packed the tanker with explosives. If we attack from here..." She finished the sentence. "They'll destroy the entire hangar, including Ethan, including Luca's team." Luca looked toward her. "What do you suggest?" She scanned the ceiling structure. Rows of enormous steel maintenance cranes stretched across the hangar roof. An old emergency control box remained mounted near the tunnel exit. A faint smile crossed her face. "I think I just found another way." "What are you planning?" She looked toward the dusty control panel. "I don't need to fight 23 mercenaries. I only need gravity." Before anyone could ask another question, she quietly climbed toward the forgotten crane controls. If they still worked. Everything inside the hangar was about to change. Ava brushed decades of dust from the rusted control panel and wiped her hands across her flight jacket. Most of the switches were cracked, and several indicator lights had burned out years earlier. The emergency crane system had clearly been abandoned, but abandoned didn't always mean useless. She carefully opened the maintenance cover and smiled when she found the original manual controls still connected to the hydraulic motors. "They never modernized it," she whispered. Luca stepped beside her. "Can it still work? If the backup hydraulic pressure hasn't leaked." She reached for the hand pump mounted beside the panel and began building pressure manually. The old gauges trembled. Nothing happened. She pumped again. Still nothing. On the sixth attempt, one faded green light flickered. A deep mechanical groan echoed through the ceiling. Vittorio looked upward. "The crane's alive." Ava nodded. "So are we." She studied the layout one final time before pointing toward a suspended maintenance platform hanging above the fuel truck. "If I swing that platform across the hangar." She paused. "It'll crush the detonator mounted on top of the tanker." Vittorio frowned. "And if you're wrong?" "The explosion kills everyone." Silence followed. Luca looked directly into her eyes. "How certain are you?" She answered without hesitation. 98%. "What about the other two?" "They keep life interesting." For the first time in the middle of a rescue mission, Luca laughed quietly. "So I've noticed." He stepped back. "Do it." Ava wrapped both hands around the control lever. The massive overhead crane shuddered before slowly moving across the ceiling. Its wheels screamed against rusted rails. Inside the hangar, one mercenary looked up. "What was that?" Another shrugged. "Probably the wind." The crane continued inching forward. 20 feet. 30. 40. The heavy maintenance platform swung directly above the disguised fuel truck. Ava inhaled slowly. "Now." She pulled the release lever. The enormous steel platform dropped. It smashed directly onto the truck's remote detonator, crushing the firing mechanism beneath several tons of steel before anyone inside the hangar understood what had happened. Gabriel Moreau spun toward the noise. "What?" His words disappeared beneath Vittorio's command. "Move." Romano tactical teams burst through 3 separate entrances simultaneously. Flashbang grenades exploded across the concrete floor. Mercenaries stumbled backward, temporarily blinded. Luca advanced with calm precision. His movements were economical. Every command clear. "Left flank. Cover the hostage." No unnecessary shots. Gunfire erupted throughout the hangar. Bullets tore through stacked cargo crates while sparks showered from steel support beams. One mercenary climbed onto the cargo aircraft's wing and opened fire with an assault rifle. Another attempted to reach the emergency detonator beneath the crushed maintenance platform. Vittorio stopped him with a single well-placed shot to the shoulder. Across the hangar, Ethan struggled desperately against his restraints. "Ava!" She heard him instantly. "I'm coming." Ignoring the firefight, she sprinted toward her brother. A burst of automatic gunfire forced her behind a stack of shipping pallets. One Romano guard collapsed nearby with a gunshot wound to his abdomen. He groaned in pain, blood rapidly soaking through his tactical vest. Ava looked toward Ethan, then back toward the wounded guard. Both needed her. She made her choice in less than a second. She crawled to the injured man first. "Stay with me." He gritted his teeth. "My family's waiting for you." She tore open an emergency trauma pouch from his vest. The bullet hadn't exited. The bleeding was severe. She packed the wound with hemostatic gauze before applying a pressure bandage exactly as she had learned years earlier during combat medical training. The guard stared at her. "You've done this before. In another life." She tightened the dressing. "Now breathe." The bleeding slowed almost immediately. "You'll make it." Without waiting for thanks, she sprinted toward Ethan. Luca watched everything from across the hangar. Even in the middle of chaos, she had stopped to save someone she had never met. Something inside him shifted. He had admired her courage before. Now he understood her heart. She never measured the value of a life. She simply saved the one in front of her. Ava finally reached Ethan and quickly cut through the restraints with a rescue knife taken from a fallen mercenary. "Ethan!" He pulled her into a fierce hug. "I thought. I know." She smiled through tears. "But I'm here." Before they could move, Gabriel Moreau's voice echoed through the hangar. "Touching." Everyone turned.